Okay, Bethany Dotson, relationship coach, trauma-sensitive yoga therapist. I'm going live. This is take 2. I had some cat interruptions. I have a 17-year-old kitty who's been with me for a really large period of my life, for 17 years, who is getting really, really needy and distracting. So this is take 2. So today I'm going live to talk about the 3 biggest reasons why you continue to attract emotionally unavailable men, even after you've done a lot of therapy, talk therapy, working on yourself, taking time off, why this seems to be a recurrent theme. And I'm going to talk about the reasons that go beyond maybe diagnostic labels that you've received from therapy, like codependency, PTSD, CPTSD. My dad was a narcissist. My mom was a narcissist. I've got a lot of trauma. I do work with trauma recovery. That's one of the first things that we work on with clients when they enroll, and I help, and we work together over a period of time. But beyond that, I'm going to go with kind of 3 more general reasons that are probably not just limited to your intimate relationships, but are probably bleeding over and pervading other areas of your life. So if this is your pattern for the majority of your life, if you tend to be a high achiever, if you are a driven person, if you tend to get with men who have a lot of issues and you're a fixer and you want to help them fix their issues, then I really want you to pay close attention. The first reason that you repeatedly attract and sustain emotionally unavailable relationships is because you're living in a state of denial. So denial can look like many forms for different people. I'm going to talk about a few key distinctions here on how denial is likely showing up for you in your life. One of the biggest and most obvious ways denial will show up for you is when you're entering a new relationship or when you are trying to keep a relationship together. We deny our bodies knowing. We deny the truth that is nudging us to do something differently, ignoring red flags, minimizing or justifying bad behavior, telling yourself this is normal, right? That's a justification or a minimization. So denying what you know to be true about a person or about a scenario in your life. Outside of those 2 examples, right? In a new relationship, we're trying to sustain or keep a failing, potentially toxic relationship together. You might be denying yourself happiness in your life. You might be denying yourself joy and the opportunity to enjoy your life. Almost everyone that I work with has incurred some type of relational or complex trauma. And one of the biggest ways this tends to show up later on in life, especially if this person has childhood trauma, is a pattern of overworking or being very, very driven, working herself so much in order to feel worthy, or to feel a sense of enoughness, or to feel like she's achieving in some way. And the irony is that she never feels enough, and she never feels truly worthy. She never allows herself to feel satisfied with her accomplishments, which then continue to drive that behavior more. It continues to reinforce that pattern of, I've got to work really, really hard on myself. So you might be denying yourself the simple pleasure of enjoying your life because you have a very ingrained belief system that you have to work really, really hard in order to be good, or in order to feel worthy. And unfortunately, this is usually the underlying driver, and one of the main reasons that a lot of high achieving women wind up in emotionally unavailable or even narcissistic relationships, because people who have narcissistic or even psychopathic tendencies tend to, and I'm going to use the word target loosely here, but tend to target women who are a little bit more altruistic, who are more, there's more sensible, they have more drive, they have more ambition, They are more willing to compromise. They're more understanding. So these are all really highly valued traits by people, other people, partners who have their own emotional trauma and who may have narcissistic or even psychopathic tendencies, because they recognize those traits in someone. That person will probably give them a long runway in the relationship to kind of get away with their bad behavior. So being hardworking, while on one hand has probably gotten you far in life, right, to a certain extent, outside your life might look like you've got it all together. But 90+% of the time when I work with women who have that hardworking pattern, that high achieving pattern, on the inside, they feel empty. On the inside, they don't feel like they're flourishing, like they're enjoying life. They feel stuck. They feel emotionally exhausted. And so there's a very strong disconnect. So the other way that you are living in denial is set by simply denying your own inherent worthiness and your ability to receive joy and pleasure and love in your life. And if you have past relationship trauma or even childhood trauma, overcoming that belief system is not something that you can just think about or read a book about, or even and again, I see a lot of people in talk therapy kind of getting stuck because they wind up talking about it, but then they never really know how to integrate or implement what they're talking about in their life. Or they talk about it and they feel better in the moment, but then they go back out into their lives and they kind of go back down into the emotional exhaustion place, right? They're not really creating momentum outside of the therapy session. So, and when we're working with trauma, we know through research now that trauma recovery is not best overcome or healed or processed by just talking about it, right, from the neck up, because trauma is stored in your body somatically, right? Our body feels an emotion when we incur a traumatic experience, and it's like our body takes a snapshot, our brain and our body takes a snapshot of that emotion, and we kind of get stuck in here. So we have to work a little differently when we're overcoming trauma. I'll get to that in a minute. But denying yourself your own sense of worthiness and enjoying your life and happiness, right? Kind of getting into this rut of working, fixing everything, tending to everybody else's needs and their wants, and then consistently putting yourself on the back burner. So denying yourself. You might have a calling on your heart. I see this too in clients that I work with. You might have a calling. Maybe it's a different career path. Maybe it's a new business idea. Maybe it's moving, or, investing in a new property, or taking that long awaited bucket list vacation. There might be things on your heart that you've been wanting to do for a long period of time that are risky in some way. They're going to get you out of your comfort zone. They're going to kind of push you out of the bird's nest. And you might be denying yourself those opportunities because your smaller self, as I like to call it, is telling you all of the ways that you will fail, all of the pitfalls. And if you've made it 30, 40, 50, 60 years of your life, you probably have a good stack of failures in your past. And so what often keeps people stuck in living in denial and denying themselves of a fulfilling life and denying themselves of joy and happiness and inner peace, especially after trauma, is referencing the stack of failures that they've already incurred. I've already had 3 failed marriages. I've already dated 5 narcissists. There's something wrong with me. And so we get stuck in this trap of referencing the failure, and that small self voice gets the loudest the closer you creep to the edge of your comfort zone. That voice gets really, really loud because it's there to help keep you safe. And if you have some form of trauma, that voice was there to protect you in that moment. But as you move through your life, that voice, that part of you then becomes maladaptive and begins to hold you back in life. And this is another big trauma symptom, complex trauma symptom, or just regular PTSD symptom. So denying yourself is the number one reason. And when you're denying yourself of, your own truth, whether it's ignoring red flags or denying yourself your truth in your life of pursuing, what it is that lights you up, or having moments in your everyday life that light you up, you're going to automatically feel depleted. You're automatically going to feel stuck in some way, or in some form of lack or scarcity. And when you're in lack or scarcity, that's a yucky feeling. Nobody wants to feel that. But sadly, so many people, at least when they initially began working with me, are there. And a lot of everybody that I talk to on the phone is there. So when you're living like that and you're in that kind of emotional pain, nobody wants to feel emotional pain. So they'll do something to try to get rid of it. And that might be trying to date again. Let me look outside of myself, and see if I can meet someone to help me fill that void. It could be shopping. It could be working more. So many people that I work with are workaholics. Work. Let me just keep myself busy so I don't have time to think about it. And that's all of that is a form of denial, and it just kind of builds momentum. And the more you're denying yourself, essentially what you're doing is you're repressing emotion. And whenever we repress emotion, and repressing emotion is inherent with past trauma, you're going to almost always meet someone in your life, usually in an intimate relationship scenario, that's going to trigger that and bring all of that back to the surface for you to face and relive. So it's much more productive when you learn how to effectively manage your emotions and stop denying yourself and honor your truth, even when it's extremely scary and way out of your comfort zone, than it is to keep living in denial. So number one reason why you're continuing to attract emotionally unavailable people, you yourself are living in some form of denial. Reason number two, and I see this a lot, you have adopted some form of a victim mindset, a victim mentality. Now, this is not to say that whatever happened to you in your past was your fault, but whenever we're in a scenario where there's someone who has power over us, and we have given up our power, meaning there's a power over and we are down here, power under dynamic, we are prone to feeling victimized. It is a normal human response, right? Especially right as you're leaving, or right as you're figuring out that this relationship or this marriage is really not working out. It's normal to want to look at everything bad that person has done to you. But beyond that initial victimization phase, unfortunately, a lot of people get stuck there and they never leave. And they never leave that phase because the pain that they incurred, going back to the trauma reference I talked about earlier, the pain that they incurred emotionally was so strong and so profound that their brain and body froze in that moment and kind of took a snapshot and memorized that feeling. And it changes the wiring in your brain subconsciously and consciously, so that you want to kind of go back to those feelings of powerlessness, anxiety, worry, fear, shame. Nobody wants to admit that they like to live in those feelings. Everybody logically knows those feelings aren't like healthy to be living in, but emotionally it's a much different story, because that's the impact of trauma. Your body tends to memorize those feelings. And then what I often see happening is people saying things like, I'm too old. My ex did all of these things, or my ex did that yesterday, or my ex is doing this, or that time that my ex did this. I had a client who had been separated, or actually divorced, for 2 years, and her ex had moved on, was going to remarry, and she was in such emotional pain every single day. She could not stop thinking about or obsessing about what her ex had done, or what her ex was doing now with his new soon-to-be wife. And she woke up, panic attacks were frequent, daily anxiety was a thing. She was just like moving through her life in a haze. And it was because her body was so used to feeling guilt, worry, regret, sadness, that she could not get out of that rut. It became a really negative, stuck feedback loop. Her body wanted to feel the anxiety, wanted to feel it's not fair, wanted to feel all of these things, and it would cause her brain to think about all the terrible things that her ex did to her. She found herself telling her story of what all the terrible things her ex did to her to anyone that would listen, And it became a thing. It became like it defined her life. And so, unfortunately, I see a lot of people, not quite to that extent, but I see a lot of people allowing their past and the things that happened in their past to define their life. And sometimes, unfortunately, when I see people with trauma who've spent a long, long time in talk therapy, but haven't really seen any pronounced changes, especially in their intimate relationships, they tend to take on a label that, something's wrong with me. Well, I've got CPTSD now. I'm officially damaged, or I know that I have narcissistic tendencies in my childhood, or people that I grew up with had these traits. So now that means that I'm more prone to that. And they start to take on that belief system and that identity. And it begins to limit the way that they move through their life. Rather than feeling hopeful and optimistic about a future relationship, their stance on relationship is, oh shit, I don't want that to happen again. I'm not even going to try a relationship. And when they go into, or when they attempt to date from that mindset, from that belief system, of course, they're going to attract more people who are going to be harmful to them, because they are vibrating their emotional frequency, the vibration, the energetic field. And we are all, whether you are woo-woo or not, are our energy, right? We're all energetic beings. We all vibrate at a frequency. I was listening to a YouTube video. If you look by Michael Bernard Beckwith, if you know him, pastor at Agape Church in Los Angeles. But if you look at anything under a microscope, you can see that the cells are vibrating. And we are part of everything in nature, in this world. We also vibrate. And so if you're vibrating from a standpoint of fear, if you're vibrating of like, what if I put myself out there and someone hurts me again? What if or if you've tried and you've met, disappointment again, what if men are assholes? Men on dating apps are all married. They just want me for sex. Then you are vibrating at a victimized level. You're vibrating as a victim, and you cannot co-create and attract what you truly desire from a state of victimhood, because in victim mindset and a victim mentality, you are keeping yourself powerlessness. And when you feel powerless, you literally have no energy to create with. You are stuck. And so again, breaking out of that isn't something that you can do by, watching a video like this, or, talking to a therapist about it and going, yeah, I understand why that's happening, or I logically know what I need to do. It takes a specific process, and especially if you've got trauma, it takes a specific skill set to navigate through that ingrained behavior and help undo that, both in a subconscious way, and then also help your body memorize new feelings, right? That are more productive, that are not from a victim mindset. So reason number 2, you're attracting emotionally unavailable people, is that on some level, you're probably still in a victimized mindset. And victimization and a victimized mindset and denial kind of go hand in hand, because they create pain, right? They create emotional pain, they create emotional stuckness. And we as human beings are hardwired to avoid pain and seek pleasure. So you might find yourself in coping mechanisms in your life that aren't really healthy, like trying to date again too soon, or staying with the wrong people because you don't want to feel alone or abandoned or rejected, or drinking a little bit too much wine every night. This is a big one that I see pretty often. Because it just kind of helps numb things out a little bit. You don't really have to think about it. Think about things at the end of the day when the day is winding down and you're by yourself and you're all alone. So these two things create unhealthy coping. And the more unhealthy coping you engage in, the more it just kind of reinforces that stuckness. So, and then to top it all off, third reason why you're continuing to attract emotionally unavailable people is because denial and living in a victim mindset and using coping to help distract yourself from feeling your uncomfortable feelings is making you emotionally unavailable. When you are not fully present to the truths in your heart, when you're not pursuing the truths in your heart, when you're not listening and taking action on that, when you are living from the standpoint of nobody would want me, of something's wrong with me, if you're diving into work, if you're diving into busy work, if you're diving into projects, if you're diving into dating and hoping it's just a numbers game, which it's not, by the way, it's an energy game, and you're hoping and hoping, but still on the inside, you feel like something's wrong with you, you're emotionally unavailable. And you, by default, because that's what you are going to attract someone else who's emotionally unavailable. And then the whole thing continues. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked to, over 600 at this point, where they've made it 40 or 50, 60 years of their life. And that's been the pattern. And it's because of these three very specific things, these three areas, regardless of trauma, regardless of codependency, regardless of a label. And so in order to break out of that, it takes a little bit of work. It takes some effort. It takes being fearless. It takes a process. It takes learning how to reprogram your neural pathways in your brain from one of a trauma imprint to one of a possibility imprint. And there are different ways to do this. I will tell you the ways that aren't super productive to do this. Simply talking about it, right? Certain forms of therapy are good for trauma, like EMDR. EMDR is good for event-based trauma. Specifically, the studies show that if you've had a car accident, a robbery, a rape, any kind of like singular incident, that EMDR is really, really good. Perhaps it was a really, really nasty fight with your ex. EMDR is really good at neutralizing the mind-body effects, the emotional, the psychological imprints of that. When we're talking about trauma that has repeatedly occurred over years of your life, like being in an emotionally abusive marriage, incurring childhood trauma, those repeated exposures to trauma are called complex trauma. And we know in research now that EMDR is not effective for that kind of trauma. What is effective for that kind of trauma is somatic work using mind-body therapy, which is what I do, yoga therapist, somatic therapist. I work both with your mind and your body because, again, like I mentioned earlier, your body has memorized certain feeling states as normal. And in order to unmemorize those feeling states, we have to work with your body and your subconscious mind to create healthier feeling states. And the great thing about working in this way is that we don't spend 10 years psychoanalyzing what your dad did to you. We don't spend tons of time talking about what your ex did to you, because every single time you dredge up the past or you relive the past, guess what? You are firing and wiring the same programming that is traumatized. You're just kind of reliving the same thing in your brain and in your body. So we have to program you into more positive feelings and make those the habit. Everybody that I talk to and everybody that I work with initially, when they come to me, they're living down here. And we have to slowly stair-step them through weekly processes and daily practice to build their neural pathways in their brain, the beliefs subconsciously that they have about themselves and love and relationship, up to a higher vibration. And then we introduce them back to relationship. Okay, now you've got your training wheels on. Let's put you into relationship. Let's give you some strategies on how to navigate relationship from this new state of being. So if you want to ultimately attract healthy relationship, you have to be love. You have to be vibrating in love. You can't be vibrating in anxiety. You can't be vibrating in emotional exhaustion or depletion or stuckness. And if you've made it 30, 40, 50, 60 years of your life, that's a pretty ingrained habit. And it's going to take consistency. It's going to take a specific process, and it's going to take some commitment and focus on your part to undo that. And you really need a plan for that. And ideally to work with someone who's going to give you that plan, help you implement that plan, get you past all of your resistance while you're implementing that plan, and keep you accountable. One of the big things that I hear when I talk to people about why they've done 10 or 20, 30 years sometimes of therapy and why they're not really seeing any changes is accountability. They feel like they don't have anybody who's helping to keep their feet to the fire. And so this is one of the main differences between therapy and coaching, is that therapy tends to focus on the why. Therapy tends to focus on your past, kind of like looking at your past and analyzing it and putting the pieces together and going, oh, that's why it's happening over here now. Coaching doesn't do that. Coaching focuses on looking at you where you are right now, going, okay, we've got all this back here. Let's devise a plan, a program, an action plan that's going to help you get from where you are right now to over here. And in the process of walking across that bridge from point A to point B, you develop the neural pathways in your brain. You develop a newer identity. You develop new programming that's more productive, that's healthier, that is more in line with the outcome that you want. But you need a process, and you ultimately need support in doing that. So if you are a professional woman, if you're high achieving, if you identify as being a fixer, probably codependent, people pleaser, you have a hard time saying no, you have a hard time setting boundaries, and you tend to wind up with emotionally unavailable men time and time again, even though every single time you tell yourself you're going to do better and you've learned your lesson, and you know in your heart you do not want to make it to the end of your life and never know what emotional freedom feels like, peace, inner happiness, not feeling like something's wrong with you. And you ultimately want to attract a relationship with someone you feel safe with, who's emotionally available. You probably don't even, there's a part of you right now that might even think that that's possible. That's okay. But if you ultimately know you don't want to get to your deathbed and realize and look back that you missed out on things because you were living in fear, then book a breakthrough call with myself, or it'll be myself or someone from my team. Go to BethanyDotson.com/talk. We'll talk with you about what's going on. We'll talk with you about what your struggle is. We'll talk about your point A, right? Your starting point. More importantly, we're going to talk about your point B, where you want to go, because if you're too focused on point A that you can't see point B yet, you're probably not ready to start moving toward point B. We got to get you more over here to point B. And then once we get you really, really clear on point A and point B, then we'll talk about whether or not we can help. Even if we can't help you cross that bridge, right? If we're not the right fit, then we're going to refer you to someone, or we're going to give you the very next action steps for you to take to start crossing that bridge. But you can't cross that bridge until you make the decision that you're tired of living in fear. Most of the time, people need to be in a lot of pain before they're ready to change. But it doesn't have to be that way, because sometimes a breakdown is needed, but sometimes a breakdown can keep you stuck in more psychological and emotional pain. And it doesn't have to be that way. So if you've tried a lot of things, if you're like, I need a plan, I need consistency, I need accountability, I need someone to hold my feet to the fire, go to BethanyDotson.com/talk. And we'll really talk about changing the rest of your life and changing the way that you move through your life, and ultimately changing the types of relationships that you attract in your life, because you were born into this life as love. That's who you are inherently. Our job is to help you ultimately remember that and live that every moment of your life. So I hope you enjoyed this live. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat box below. I'll circle back and answer them. Hit replay if you'd like, so I know that you're watching the replay. And wishing you all a very blessed, happy, and joyous week. We'll talk soon.